You're now watching the Mike Missanelli podcast on the BetRivers Network.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Mike Missanelli podcast. Beautiful spring day in the Delaware Valley as we record this podcast, number 188, by the way, on Tuesday, May 28th. Hope everybody had a wonderful Memorial Day weekend. Turned out to be decent at the shore. If you're down at the beach, hope everybody enjoyed it with the barbecues. And let's not forget that Memorial Day honors our fallen soldiers. So all that is good. I know sometimes we get involved in happy talk and we lose the meaning of certain holidays. And this holiday is to honor all of our servicemen who have made this a free country. But also it's turned into a get-together and a family gathering, which is pretty substantial. And you see a lot of American flags around. You see a lot of bunting on area stores and such. So hopefully everybody had a really good Memorial Day with the family. Of course, the podcast is brought to us by BetRivers and the BetRivers app, where you can make all kinds of great bets. If you had the Celtics winning in a sweep at the beginning of this series, then you made a lot of money on the BetRivers app. The Celtics beat the Indiana Pacers in a rather easy, not easy, they were all close games, but you know the outcome was pretty much determined that the Celtics were going to win this. So this most likely sets up an NBA Finals of Celtics Mavericks. The Celtics are going to be prohibitive favorites in this game, but a really interesting little subplot to the game. Kyrie Irving going back to Boston, two superstars for Dallas. Boston with also two superstars. So I think it's going to be a lot more interesting. If you had Celtics and the Mavericks in the NBA Finals before the season started, a salud, because I don't know how many people had the Mavericks playing for the NBA championship. Let's talk about our fighting Phils, as they are now, they've lost 3 of their last 4. To mediocre teams. They lost 2 out of 3 to the Colorado Rockies, who stink on ice. And then the San Francisco Giants, who are playing a lot better lately. They're not a bad team. I would suggest they're a mediocre team. So they've lost 3 of the last 4. And I know people are out there going, oh, my God. Oh, they need this, they need that. Listen, don't worry about them losing 3 of their last 4. They are clearly, in my view, one of the 2 best teams in the National League. Also, as we sit here right now, I can give you a declarative sentence that the Phillies have the division wrapped up. Oh, we're not even into June yet, and I can see it. And there's one reason for that. The Braves aren't the Braves. Now, the Braves have now lost Ronald Acuna for the year. Now, they're a nice team, but without Acuna and without their number 1 starter, I don't believe they're 6 games back of the Phillies. The Phillies aren't bad enough to lose that many games. The Braves aren't good enough to win that many games to actually surpass the Phillies. So I know this is dangerous. I know people, Mike, you're a jinx. You know, stick the jinx up your Kulu, okay? Because here's the bottom line. The Phillies are much better than the Braves. They're up by 6 games now. They're going through a little lull. It's not a big lull. It's just a little lull. So I started to extrapolate the playoffs, which I usually do. And I think this is a fun exercise because you look at it and you go, okay, it can change. But as of now, here's where we stand in the Major League Baseball playoffs. The first 2 teams with the best records, get a bye. They'll have the 4 teams playing the first round. The top division winner plays the worst wild card team, and then the 2 wild card teams in between. So I believe that the Phillies will either finish with the 1 seed in the National League or the 2 seed with the Dodgers, okay? I don't think that that's a crazy prediction. All right, so let's just roll with this. If the Phillies finish with the number 1 seed, they would play the winner of the 5 versus 4 series, which right now is San Diego. We've already experienced that. If Philly plays San Diego, that's the San Diego Padres are going to be the Phillies in the series, and Atlanta. So the Padres and Atlanta will hook up in that first series. The Phillies will play the winner if they get the number 1 seed. There are 2 minor problems with this before I get to the second scenario. Buys in the first round have in the past hurt Major League teams. And it's been under examination. You know, you give these teams some time off. They've earned the bye. Yet when they come back, they're not as sharp as the teams that have played through. You've seen this happen now in Major League Baseball. So that's one concern for the Phillies, getting the bye. And here's the biggest concern, the Braves. The Braves, for the last couple of seasons, have been the favored team in that series against the Phillies. Both times they have folded. Maybe because of the pressure of having to carry that kind of mantle. Here they are now in a spot with nothing to lose. So it is possible that the Braves that we see are actually a team that says, what the hell? We're looser now. We're not expected to win. And maybe in the playoffs, that makes them a more dangerous team. But we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. If the Phillies finish with the number 2 seed and the Dodgers get the number 1, the Phillies will play the winner of either the Cubs and Giants, who are right now in that circle as the 6th seed, at Milwaukee, who will win their division. And they'll be the division winner that doesn't get a bye. And so it'll be Milwaukee against the Cubs or Giants. Now, in that series, the Phillies will obviously be favored in that one as well. So whatever happens now to the Phillies, they're losing a couple games, they're doing this, they're doing that. I look at the Phillies as a team that doesn't have many flaws. Now, we could sit here and nitpick and say, oh my God, Castellanos is a train wreck. And he is. And he's played every game so far. 2 reasons. Thompson apparently is afraid of him because the guy says, I want to play every game, and he accommodates him by playing every game. And the second thing is, he really doesn't have anybody who can play right field, which is what we're talking about last week when I would acquire a right-handed hitting outfielder before the trade deadline, so you can play him in left, you can play him in right with Castellanos some days off. I am worried about Castellanos has hit the major league wall, that we've seen the best of Castellanos. So I know people go, well, he's streaky. Well, he's not streaky anymore. He's just bad. He's hitting $196. That's not streaky. Yeah, we're almost into June now, and he looks all twisted up at the plate. I think he needs to make some stance changes. I know he's got that toe up, the left toe up, and he's got the bat way back here. I think he's got to get the bat like a little bit here away from his body because he's trying to hit everything the other way because he thinks that that's the best way to do it. A guy who's a hitter like that needs to not worry about pushing the ball to the right side. Just get in there and wail. Pull. I don't understand. You're supposed to be a power hitter. You've had 30 home run seasons, and you're trying to hit ground balls through the hole, first and second base, every single time because you think that you're waiting on the ball and that's the best way to do it. I don't think that is. So I don't know what they're doing with him, but he scares me. Rojas obviously scares me because he's not a hitter, and they need one more right-hander in the bullpen. They're relying too much on Dominguez, and they've got a journeyman coming in there, Ruiz, who's you can't count on guys like that. You need somebody that's a little more reliable in a situation like that, like the Phillies had in 2008 when they had Chad Durbin, who could pitch the 6th or 7th inning. And then you get to the high leverage guys like Dominguez and Hoffman from the right side. And then you've got Alvarado, Strahm, and Soto, who is kind of up and down. But it's like, I don't understand. There can't be any worry out there. I saw a couple of tweets during the weekend. Oh, my God, look, the Phillies have lost 3 of 4. Come on. Man, they're really a good, solid team. So there you go. There's the playoff situation. And, of course, next week they will go to London. I don't quite understand the fanfare of this series playing the Mets in London. I don't know if it's a thing for Philly fans to go over to London and visit the old city and see a couple ball games. I don't really understand the need to go to London to play baseball, or I know Chase Utley is, eminently involved in this whole thing with expanding the brand of baseball to various countries, but it's the Mets, right? They're playing the Mets. I mean, June 8th, 9th, Phillies in London against the Mets, big whoop. I don't know. I go over and see Big Ben and have a little fun. All right. A tragic, this is one of the strangest stories that I've ever read in sports, and it's a story that kind of gives you a heavy heart. Now, Grayson Murray, the professional golfer, played the first round of the tournament last weekend, played the second round, and then bailed out with 2 holes to play on Friday, saying that he was ill. By Saturday morning, Grayson Murray was dead. And it came out a couple days later that he had committed suicide, which was the obvious guess that people had. Grayson Murray is a guy who was a troubled golfer who struggled with alcoholism and mental depression circumstances, and had been sober, according to himself and many friends, for many months prior to this event. And the one thing that he had talked about before was the pressure of having to succeed, especially in a form like PGA golf, where it's just so ultra competitive. You can be at the top of the heap one day, and then you find yourself demoted to the Korn Ferry Tour, and then out of golf, and then you got to figure out what you're going to do for a living. But it's a really difficult life, which is why I really respect PGA golfers. I don't really like their personalities, but I respect the climb that it takes, just like I respect any climb. Like baseball players that get to the major leagues, when you get to the major leagues, you have survived a monster climb, and you've survived a lot of mental circumstances of failure. And when you get to failure, either you give up or you keep pushing. And it's hard when you experience failure after failure, when the expectation. Grayson Murray was a highly touted junior golfer, and so he was expected to succeed. And when you don't succeed, it weighs on you mentally. Some people can handle that, and he succumbed to other things. The circumstances, I guess, aren't important on how this happened, but I'm just wondering, like, he probably experienced those fears of failure that came crashing down on him while he was on the course, and said, "I can't take it anymore," and walked off the course. And at that moment, what did he do? Did he go back to his hotel room and take an overdose? I don't know the circumstances of it, but I at that moment, as much as he battled those feelings of depression and fear of failure, it encompassed him at that particular moment. And that's the sad part about this whole thing. Now, the PGA has announced that they're going to step up their efforts for mental health treatment, which should have been done a really long time ago. I mean, golfers can be basket cases. It's like the margin of error is so slim to be a professional golfer, and every week you're grinding and competing and playing 4 rounds of golf if you make the cut, and even then if you don't win, and you people ask you about and then you change code. It's just a crazy lifestyle for professional golfers, and that's why I respect them. So my heart goes out to that whole situation for his family, and they lived that whole situation with him for many years. And finally he just kind of gave into it, and that's the tragedy and the ramifications of mental health and problems as you go through with depression through all those years. So the weekend did not start off with really good news, and then here comes Bill Walton today. The news that he passed away yesterday. And, these things are shocking because you don't expect them. Like, nobody expected this Grayson Murray news. All of a sudden, boom, it hits you. Nobody expected that Bill Walton was going to die anytime soon. Like, nobody really knew that he was ravaged with that much cancer to the point where he was going to die any day. I mean, he was out and about all the time. And I was like, what? Bill Walton died? And the thing about Bill Walton is, obviously, he was a quirky guy his entire life. It was the Grateful Dead and all that, had a whole connection. And but here's the thing that I don't like. When people in the media, sports media, try to get clever and say, well, was he a better broadcaster than who gives a fuck whether he was a better broadcaster than a player? He was a great player. A great player can never be considered a better broadcaster than he was a player. It's the most ridiculous take you could possibly have. And I know the people that said that meant well, because they were really trying to compliment him on his unique broadcasting style. I didn't frankly think he was a great broadcaster. I thought he was a quirky broadcaster. I thought he was kind of out there and for that reason was entertaining. But this was a guy who would have been one of the greatest NBA players of all time if he was not ravaged by injuries. He apparently had more than 30 surgeries. His knees were shot to hell. He was one of these tall, angular guys who always had stress on his knees. And he never really, in the pros, became the great college player that he was in college, where he was phenomenal. He actually redefined the center position. He had the fundamentals of rebounding where he always kept the ball over his head. You can never strip him. He caught the ball up here. He kept it here. His outlet passes were pristine. Two-hand outlet passes to start a fast break. He was a marvelously technical, excellent basketball player. And the shame of it was that he never had enough of a career in the NBA for us to say, oh my God, he was one of the best centers of all time. But you don't taint that by saying, was he a better broadcaster? Like, I know that sounds good to you to say something like that, but basically it's disrespectful to say he could have been a better broadcaster than a player, because he was a great player. Let that stand on its own. That's the only thing. I know, Darren, you asked me this question about that whole thing. I know Nick Wright said this, and I think he was trying to compliment Bill Walton, but it doesn't come off as a compliment when you say a guy's a better broadcaster than a player. It just sounds wrong.
Well, I wasn't really suggesting that he was. I just more or less wanted to have a conversation. I like having the conversation of athletes that turn to like another career within sports. So I just thought, he has a well-rounded resume.
But you can never be a better broadcaster than you were a player if you were a great player. To say something like that, to me,
I never said he was.
Sounds ridiculous. I'm not saying you. I'm saying in general.
Oh.
A great player should never be, well, he's even a better broadcaster. No, he's not. You know how hard it is to be a great player in any sport? Like, don't taint it. It's easy to be a broadcaster, for Christ's sake. It really is. You just flow with it. But it takes sweat and toil to be a great basketball player. And so I think it's demeaning when you even suggest something like that. And I know people aren't thinking of it that way when they say something like that. Bill Walton was a great basketball player who could have been one of the all-time greats if he had not been racked by injuries. Yeah, he was quirky. He was out there. But he looked at life like any time that any episode in life had to be fun for him, and he made it fun. And that was the unique quality of Bill Walton. When you listen to him, you go, man, he's crazy. He's saying all this kind of weird stuff, but it was somehow he was harmless and entertaining. But I remember
that's what I will remember him the most. Before you get into your stories, that's how I will always remember him first, as a guy who was so kind and he came off so genuine. Like when people have quirks like that, but there's nothing malicious about them, that's a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
It really is. And that's how I'll remember him.
He's great quality. And everybody's been around him and knew him intimately. And I never knew Bill Walton, but the people that did know him were just, they're just stunned by this. But all these great stories flow out of everybody who ever knew Bill Walton. For me, Bill Walton represents a pain in my side that if I allow myself to be a fan, like I was way back when I was a kid, he represents pain. And here's why. I grew up to be a monster basketball fan. I was a really precocious basketball player, and therefore I was into the Sixers beyond belief. I was a kid when Wilt Chamberlain played, and the Sixers finally had beaten the Boston Celtics to win an NBA championship. I was like 8. But I remember being glued to the TV, as in the NBA was on tape delay, but occasionally they're black and white games on Sunday afternoon. The Sixers and Celtics were the draw. And the Sixers finally broke through in 1966-67 with Wilt Chamberlain and Hal Greer and Chet Walker and Luke Jackson and guys like that. It was a great team that finally beat Bill Russell and the dreaded Celtics. So we fast forward to 1977. The Sixers had gotten into a period of dreadful bottom feeder basketball. And to resuscitate the franchise, they had signed a guy that they had drafted, but he wound up playing in the ABA and not for the Sixers. And finally, they were able to get him from the ABA, from the Indiana Pacers. George McGinnis came to Philadelphia and rekindled the whole basketball dynamic, the pro basketball dynamic in Philadelphia. And then in 1977, here comes Julius Erving with the same kind of story. They get him from the ABA. They buy him out of his contract in the ABA. So now they put together two of the greatest players from the ABA that everybody's talking about. There was this crazy anticipation on how good were these guys, because we had really never seen them. George McGinnis was a star player in the ABA, but we didn't know from George McGinnis because we didn't see ABA games. And Julius Erving, there was the legend of Julius Erving. We saw the highlights. We saw the big afro. We saw the slam dunk contest, the whole thing. So when they put them together, there was this dynamic. Oh, my God, they are building a juggernaut of a team here. And sure enough, that team, although it struggled to find its chemistry early, wound up winning the Eastern Conference. And they go to play the Portland Trailblazers, this mystery team from Portland who has Bill Walton as their center, but nobody really knew that much about Portland. They were tucked away in the great Northwest, and here we come. It looks like the Sixers are a better team than the Portland Trailblazers. The series starts at the old Spectrum. Now, if you get a chance, you need this. These games were televised, and you can actually find them. And I've seen them on television. They sometimes go back in time and play games from this series. But the Spectrum was this barren landscape, just a basketball court. It was a nice arena, but when you see an arena back then and how it was played, and without all the fanfare and the advertisements and the whole thing, it's going to be really odd to watch the game. However, the Sixers win the first two games of the series. Now, I'll give you the starting lineups for both teams because I was absolutely glued to this series. I was still a rabid Sixer fan, and I said, well, the Sixers are going to win the NBA championship. Here was their starting lineup. Henry Bibby was the point guard. Doug Collins was the two guard. The starting center was Caldwell Jones, but Darryl Dawkins played a lot, so they would interchange that on the center position. George McGinnis and Julius Erving were the forwards. And I'm looking at that team, and I go, that team cannot be beaten by this Portland team, who had Bill Walton as the center, two really good guards that we would learn were really good guards because we hadn't seen them, and they played together beautifully. Lionel Hollins, who would then become a Sixer years later, and Johnny Davis, who would wind up coaching the Sixers way back during the process time, not the process time, but whatever that was called, the hinky period. So it was Lionel Hollins, Johnny Davis, Bill Walton, and their forwards were Maurice Lucas, this big barrelly power forward, and a skinny white small forward named Bobby Gross, who kind of looked like Bobby Jones, but less of a talented player. And they threw this little crazy white dude off the bench named Dave Torzik. And I'm looking at this guy. This team can't beat the Sixers. In fact, the Sixers win the first two games of the series at the Spectrum. They're up 2-0 as they go to Portland. Bill Walton dominates them for the rest of the series. And they win. The Portland Trailblazers beat the Sixers 4 straight games. And the team starts to disintegrate. Darryl Dawkins has a fight in a game with Maurice Lucas, and he gets thrown out of the game. The chemistry of the Sixers goes completely out the door. George McGinnis shot like 2 for 174 in the series, could not make a shot, and I've never seen anything like a team. They fell apart for 4 straight games, and Bill Walton and the Portland Trailblazers, coached by former St. Joe Hawk head coach Jack Ramsey, with Lionel Hollins, who would become a Sixer later, and Johnny Davis, who would become the coach of the Sixers, wins the 1977 NBA championship. It was, and some other results have come on, but to me, that was one of the greatest failures in the history of Philadelphia sports. And it was right up there with the Eagles losing to Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Phillies losing to the Arizona Diamondbacks and the Phillies losing to the St. Louis Cardinals. You can go down the list of these losses that linger with you if you're a Philadelphia sports fan. But that was the first one that cut my belly. I just could not believe that the Portland Trailblazers and Bill Walton, from that moment on, became my enemy. Now, I learned to respect him because he was a brilliant basketball player who obviously was coached by arguably the greatest college coach ever, and John Wooden at UCLA. So there you go. Darren, your thoughts?
there's nothing like pain, sports pain, when you're a child, right? That stays with you the rest of your life. I could totally see that. I have my own memories, not of Bill Walton, but the pain memories of the Eagles when I'm young and the Phillies when I'm young. But yeah, I love hearing stories like that because you can just see at your age now, it still bothers you and it still affects you.
I was weak-kneed. I gotta be honest with you. I was in college at the time, and I'm bragging about the Sixers the whole time. And of course, I'm at school with all these Pittsburgh yahoos who are rooting against the Sixers because of their Philadelphia jealousy. And so I had to put up with that crap as the Sixers lost to the Portland Trailblazers. And I don't know. I was stunned by it. I'm looking at the Sixers. They got Julius Erving. They got George McGinnis. They got Doug Collins, 3 All-Stars. Henry Bibby was a solid player. They brought a couple good guys off the bench that year, including Steve Mix came off the bench that year. And they lost at Portland Trailblazers. So when I think of
that
Bill
pain
Walton,
has not been exercised.
I just cringe when I him passing away reignited that bad feeling about the Portland Trailblazers, and that kick-started a run of great basketball in Portland. That became the city. They called it Rip City, and it developed a really great basketball tradition, which was started by that team. And Maurice Lucas actually was from Pittsburgh. He was, I think, he went to Shenley High in Pittsburgh, and wound up. I think he went to Marquette. I think he was a Marquette guy, and he was I remember he and Darryl Dawkins got into a fight, and they literally squared off like this. Like real boxers,
like a boxing match.
Yeah, it wasn't grab you. It was just like and people stood. It was like a hockey fight. People stood around watching. They're two monsters, and the referees going, "I'm not getting in the middle of this." And they're just like he relied on the teammates to break up that fight. All right, so it's sad that we won't hear from Bill Walton anymore because he always had some really quirky, out there things to say, and instead of us thinking he was just totally weird, he was weird in an entertaining way, if that's possible. All right, so that'll do it for today's podcast. The Mike Missanelli podcast brought to us by BetRivers. Hope you enjoyed it. We're going to be previewing the Philly series in London later in the week with some special guests like Tim Kirchin and maybe Doug Glanville. We'll see what happens with that, so stay tuned.
Yeah, that'll be a fun show.
I'm sorry?
That'll be a fun show with those guys on there.
And they'll be on the trip doing the broadcast for the game, so we'll have a lot of fun with those guys telling baseball stories and such. You can reach me email mike@mikemiss.com. You can check me out on Twitter at MikeMiss25. I'm also on Facebook. And Cameo, if you want a personal shout-out, just go to cameo.com. For any occasion, I'll give you a personal shout-out, whether it's a wedding, whether it's a graduation, whether it's any kind of affair where you're celebrating an engagement maybe. You want me to give you a little pep talk for the engagement? I do that on cameo.com. Just put my name in there, and you'll get a personal shout-out from me. All right? Thanks for listening to the Mike Missanelli podcast. Tell your friends and neighbors about it. You can subscribe for free. Have a great rest of the day, everybody. We'll talk to you Thursday. Bye-bye.